Hello and welcome to the Legendary Ladies podcast. So, since it is spooky season, we thought we would do a legendary list about horror movies. So, we are going to be talking about our top 5 horror
So
movies.
we didn't invite Amy.
So, we did initially invite Amy, but Amy was like, "I've seen let's see 5 horror movies." So her top 5 was just going to be the 5 that she saw. She was also busy with her play. So we were like, "Okay, we'll let you go." So instead, we have friend of the podcast and good friend of Cats, Phil, on to talk spooky movies.
Hey everyone, I'm your substitute Amy today.
Thank you for joining us, Phil. Thank you for taking Amy's place in this horror movie chat we have.
I'll always talk about horror movies, so
Well,
glad to be here.
you write a horror comic, right? So
I do.
you're in the genre.
I am in the genre. I always knew if I was going to write something, it was going to be horror. So that was my starting point. And now we have a lot of books, but horror is
Now
always
we
so.
want to get back to horror. It's been
Yeah,
like, oh man, we have so much stuff that it's like we wish we could write even more horror. Which we have our Beast and Snow book that came out, which it kind of
it's got
dances
horror
in the
elements for
horror.
sure.
Yeah, dances in horror.
I
Love.
think. Oh, I was gonna say we've talked about this before during our spooky seasons because this is maybe our second or third time
I
doing
want to
our.
say this is our third
I
time
think
doing
this is our
spooky
third time
season.
doing the
Yeah.
spooky season, but since we're counting down our top fives, I think it's maybe interesting to see when did we get into horror movies
Mm.
and what do we like so much about horror movies? Like, have you been watching horror movies since you were younger, or did you get into it like later in life? So, ask special guest star Phil first.
Sure. As Kat can attest, I come from a family of horror lovers, like
Nice.
obsessive horror lovers. Like so many of my aunts and
Your
uncles.
aunt
My aunt
especially.
really goes all out. She's one of those. She's one of those ladies who has like a house that on in all of October is like decked out. She's a massive lawn that's full of like mannequins. Um, my whole family, aunts, uncles, cousins, siblings, all love horror movies. I actually didn't watch horror movies until I was probably in like late middle school, early high school. As a kid, I was like deathly afraid of anything that wasn't animated. I
Did Mary and Dan watch it when they were in
m-
older or?
when they were in like middle school, because when I
Okay.
started watching is when they would watch, like with so
Okay.
many things with as an older sibling. But I was traumatized by, believe it or not, Spider-Man, the Tobey Maguire movie.
Wait,
The
what?
Green, the Green Goblin at one point threw like a bomb at someone and he disintegrated into a skeleton. And for some reason, that
So
really
funny.
like scarred my 8-year-old brain. And I was like, I'm not watching anything that's not animated until I'm in like 7th or 8th grade.
So I'm
And then
old enough.
That's
and then
amazing.
it was an instant like veer in the opposite direction where I think it was Scream, oddly enough, which is funny because it's such a commentary on other horror movies, but I watched it and I loved it. And I was like, oh, now I have to work my way backwards and watch all other horror. And, now I consider myself a horror savant, a horror aficionado. Horror is
Well,
my favorite.
you really like watching Dead Meat. Like you literally watch commentary about
Oh
horror.
yeah, Dead Meat's one of the YouTube channels I watch the most. I love horror. I love the making of horror. I love learning like behind the scenes facts about horror. I like how horror is a community as well. I think
Yeah.
people who like horror, like the same people often stick in horror and like creatively, but B, also like people bond over horror very easily. You have a lot of like really recognizable subgenres and tropes. As a horror writer, I really like character driven horror, and I think I'm definitely not alone there. I think there's a reason it's such like a
Buffy.
versatile genre. I love
Yeah.
Buffy.
And that's so character driven. And it's interesting because like just seeing the Haunting fans in general, they're so dedicated to Haunting because it's horror and obviously it's a good book. But
Haunting
especially the
being my
horror element.
comic.
Yeah, your comic Haunting, which I think we mentioned. We did 2 of these. So I'm like, did we mention this one? I don't know. But yeah, so that's super interesting too.
So, Kat, how about you? When did you start watching and like what do you like about horror?
Around the same time, I've told this story on the podcast before, and I think I've told you guys this, but I'll say it again. When I was a kid, my mom made horror movies sound like it was you're seeing the devil's face, like it's like the worst thing in the world, and you shouldn't watch it. And it was more of like her personal preferences. She never liked horror, but it was never like my mom was never the type of person to say you can't watch this because it's too old for you. She kind of allowed us to watch whatever we wanted. Um, and so it wasn't like, oh, you can't watch it because you're too young. It's just more of that she didn't like horror, so she couldn't expect anybody else in life to like horror. It's like I don't get why anyone likes this. But my friend, it was my one of my best friends, Luke, who to this day I'm still friends with, and he really liked horror. Like his family goes all out on Halloween. They have like billions of trick or treaters. They love the movie Halloween. They love slashers, and he watched it as a kid. He actually in grammar school when he was in second grade, he brought in Halloween, and a teacher caught him. He brought in the DVD, and he's like, "Oh, I was bringing it to a friend," and like that, we got so much trouble with these horror movies. They were like rated R slasher films, and but he really liked it. And I guess maybe my first gateway is Scary Movie actually, because I didn't know. Yeah, I think I saw that in theaters probably first, and then I realized, oh, that's not that scary because obviously it's a comedy. I didn't even
Yeah.
know it was. But then I was like, oh, that wasn't too scary. And then my friend, he made us watch Rob Zombie's Halloween when we were
Oh
in
my
eighth grade. And I was like, oh, this is not scary. This is just stupid. And then he's like, oh, we should watch more then if you liked it. And then we watched like Scream. He's like, I really think you'll like Scream. And we watched all the Screams. And I love Scream, which I'm sure we'll talk about today. So I really enjoyed that. And then I just kind of branched off to other stuff. And I was like, wow, I really like horror. And I got into Buffy when I was in high school. And I think, Phil, you got into high school, right? It wasn't college?
No, actually, early college is when
Oh
I
wow,
first watched
college. So
Buffy.
I enjoyed Buffy from high school, and was like, oh, that's kind of horror-esque too. And this is very like I got very obsessed with the idea of the final girl. Like I really loved that, and it was just a trope I really enjoyed, and something I realized, and I think especially at that time, we're all looking for representation. There wasn't a lot of female-led action heroes in the day, so it's
No.
just like there was no Captain Marvel, there was no any of that. Like the best you were gonna get was Power Rangers, and this is the first time I ever saw a girl be able to be kind of an action hero and have her own story, and really her be the main character. So I think that's what really attracted me to her, was that like you got to see this kind of female urgency where if you look at from the outside looking in, you don't think it's a female driven thing because it's like, oh, they try and get killed, but really they are the main character of the movie. So yeah, I love horror, and I've enjoyed horror for a very long time.
Yeah, that's so interesting to think about because I think that was probably something that I really liked about horror too when I was younger because Buffy came out I guess I was in middle school. Buffy was like airing when I was in like middle school and like a little high school. And I liked that like the female characters got to have agency in these horror movies. And even if they were, screaming and running, they were also fighting back usually. But
Mm-hmm.
I think I started watching creepy stuff with when I was pretty young with like Are You Afraid of the Dark and like
Right.
reading the Goosebump books and things like
You
that.
started earlier than us.
Yeah, I never forget that like we had a teacher that for some reason when we were little for story time told us the entire story of like When a Stranger Calls, that that movie where it's
Yeah.
like the girl's babysitting and then he calls and he's like, have
Why
you checked
aren't
the
you looking at
children?
checking the
Yeah,
children?
which it's so funny. A couple years ago I finally watched the movie because I was like,
I've never seen it.
I had this memory of it being the scariest thing I'd ever heard because when you're told the story, it's actually a very scary story as a child. And then the movie has like, 10 scary minutes at the front and then it's just incredibly boring almost the whole way through
It's
after that.
uncanny. Like those first 10 minutes, it's might as well be two separate movies.
Yes,
Every once in a
yeah.
while I do rewatch just those 10 minutes because I think it is really good. And then it's just crazy how they literally don't even follow the same character.
No,
Wow.
yeah, the first like 10,
Well, that's
15
very
minutes of that
Scream
movie.
too. That's
Yeah.
probably how Scream got its
No,
That's
Scream was
opener.
partially inspired by it. Yeah,
Yeah.
the phone call angle.
yeah,
And
I think
also
that
having completely different characters be in
Yeah.
the front.
exactly. Yeah, so I remember her telling us about that which was not appropriate because I think
No.
we were in grammar school, so we
I
were
thought you were gonna
like
say that she
6
like
or
read
7.
Goosebumps to you. I'm like, that makes sense, but you
They
weren't going that
you know what?
direction.
This I think it might have been the same teacher, so maybe she was also a spooky gal,
Mm.
but also did read us Goosebumps because I remember our class got read the one about the living doll, which does kind of
Mm.
tie into our last conversation about Chucky, because there was a Goosebumps book about like a ventriloquist doll that comes to
I
life,
remember that
I
one.
remember
skitters
that one.
around. I remember that one very well because it was traumatizing. But for some reason, I always kind of liked the scary stuff. I liked like Hocus Pocus and things that were aimed a little younger, like Nightmare Before Christmas and Are You Afraid of the Dark?
Scooby-Doo,
But
Courage the
then,
Cowardly
but then
Dog.
as I got older, I was also watching like X-Files and Buffy. So I've kind of always liked the horror stuff. I think there's like something to be said about the way that horror can like balance a bunch of different genres while still being kind of spooky and scary. Like I think we talked in the last recording, which might be released after this and might be released before, who knows, when we were talking about Bride of Chucky. But there's so many different horror subgenres, and I like that like horror as a genre has so many different ways that you can kind of come at it.
Totally agree.
And I saw Abby in the chat says, I got into horror later in life, not until college. Read a couple of things that scared me as a kid. Freddy Krueger still scares me, and decided horror wasn't for me and stayed away. And now I love it.
That's usually the telltale,
That's
right?
all of our journeys.
Yeah.
I feel like you're either like immediately like, ooh, horror, or you're like lightly traumatized by it, and then like come back to it later and goes like, oh, that wasn't so bad.
I feel like Amy is somewhat in that camp where when we showed her Scream, I think she's like, I was scared, but it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, I feel like, well, that's the funny thing is that my husband Mike, when we first started dating and it was like spooky season and I was like, this is my time, and I put my witch hat on or whatever. I was like, oh, you got to watch some horror movies with me. And he was not a horror movie guy at all. And we watched the first Conjuring and he was like, I am dying here. but now he watches the horror movies with me and it will turn it off and he'll go, huh, it wasn't that bad. So like
right? Yeah.
by watching them.
Exposure
therapy. Yeah. It's like, oh, this isn't actually that bad at all.
I really can't think of any of them. Besides, you have to watch Bride of Chucky to understand this reference. But besides Matilda, there hasn't been anything that scared me too
You have
much.
to watch the Bride of Chucky podcast for the record. Watch the movie and look for Matilda reference.
We're starting our own like a horror podcast cinematic universe where you have to have watched the
This
Bride of
episode
Chucky
canonically takes place after the Bride of Chucky episode.
I won't explain the reference here. You really do.
You have to. You just have to go listen
and
to
it's
it.
towards the end too, so you got to watch that.
So you got to go all the way in to really understand Kat's trauma. So before we get into our lists, I'm interested in how you put your list together because I had a hard time because I was like, is it my 5 favorites?
Yes.
Or it's my 5 favorites, but then I was like, is it a movie that scared me or is it just a movie I liked? So mine is kind of a combo of like movies that scared me and also movies I liked. So Fiona says, Fiona's dropping in for the first time in a while because she's in the same time zone. She says, I'm not great with horror as I'm a wuss, but I do love all the 90s slasher movies, Scream, etc. Oh, she also says, I know what you did last summer, Urban Legend.
Love Urban Legend.
Man, the 90s did have like an early 2000s had like a great like slasher moment. There was just like so many good slasher movies and then they just stopped making them.
I do agree.
But going back to your question, how we came up with it. So what was funny is that before we even knew we were doing this podcast, me and Phil were at a Pride and there was like a slow moment. And I feel like Marianne sent us something. Like she sent us like movies she wanted to see on AMC. And for some reason that gave us the idea of like we should do our top 10 horror movies. What? I really don't remember why.
We were bored and you always want to rank things. And I'm sure Marianne, my sister, did send like, oh, these are the movies we have to see. And you were like, oh, we got to talk about our favorites. And she was like, you got to write them down. I was like, all right, I'll do it later. You're like, no, do it now. I'm bored. And then we both made our lists and we were going through them in the car on the way back. And then we were like, oh, we should talk about this in our newsletter that we do bi-weekly. And then it turned into, oh, we should also talk about it on the podcast. And now here we are. Yeah. So thankfully you made me do the work early, which is good.
Which I'm happy about, it ended up working out. But how I ranked it was more of like it was hard because it's just like, are these good movies? Because you could say Bride of Chucky is not a good movie, but it's a fun movie and it could be in your top 10 or your top 5.
My list definitely has moved around a lot and will probably continue to move between us recording this now and then us doing the top 10 for our newsletter. I definitely
mentioned for the newsletter we're doing top 10. We're doing
this
our
one.
Top
We're doing
5,
top 5.
so
yeah, and
you should read our newsletter so you get to see our top 10.
You should find us and read it. But even when I was just pulling the list together right before this, I was like, oh, I feel like this is going to change again because like it's hard to find the right criteria between is this my favorite horror movie? Is this the best made horror movie? Is it scary? Does it like affect me in some way? So, I think there's one thing that this has taught me is there's a lot of horror movies that I really, really love. If I didn't know that already, then I definitely know that now. It was hard to even come up with a top 10, let alone
It
a
was
top 5.
really hard. I really struggled with this. I had a lot of other ones that I enjoyed, but we should mention Abby says, I did my 5 favorites. Ones I liked watching the most, had really memorable moments, not necessarily what scared me the most, and it's all over the place in terms of horror subgenres.
Yeah. I think that's the best list will be all over the place in those subgenres.
Yeah.
How about you, Morgan? What did you kind of land on?
Yeah, that's kind of what I did, is like the movies that I like, that I can put, that I'll watch multiple times. But also I did throw in a little bit of like, if it was a movie that scared me, I'll note it when we get to them. But like kind of lights on movies, like there's 2 movies on this list that I had to like sleep with my lights on for a couple days, and I was like, well, they have to be on the list because
so funny.
obviously they lightly traumatized me. So at this point, because I watch, every year I watch a bunch of horror movies, it's getting rarer and rarer that like something really like shakes me up anymore. So I was like, just gotta throw those on the list.
I'll say my number 5 pick falls in that category. It's the first thing to shake me in a while.
Yeah, no, I agree. I know your number 5 pick, and we'll talk about it. I will say, as people that know me well on this podcast, I actually think my top 5 is going to really surprise you, because I'm looking at my list now. There's 3 movies I really would have thought was going to be on my list, and they're in my top 10, but they're not in my top 5, and I'm actually pretty surprised. Maybe I'll mention those 3 movies at the end.
I was going to say we should have a little part at the end for our honorable mention, so we can
Sure.
cheat a little bit. But
I like that. I do like that we could cheat a little bit and mention our honorable mentions. But yeah, there's some that I was really surprised by, and there's some that I was surprised that went so high. So I'm excited. But let's get cooking on it.
Yeah, let's
Morgan,
get
you
into
should go
it.
first.
So am I going first?
I was saying, well, you get to pick whoever.
Oh, okay. I think let's start with Phil, because I'm interested, because he said that his was really scary. So what is your number 5 pick?
Okay, number 5 for me is Barbarian 2022.
The movie I forced Morgan to watch too.
Oh my God,
Morgan.
I did watch it. Honestly, Barbarian was very close to making my list as well. I liked it so much.
Number 6 on my list.
I just missed the cut. I was debating 5 or 6. When we get to honorable mentions, I'll tell you what it beat out. But I think what I love about Barbarian, like I said earlier, is that it's the first movie in a long time that actually had me on the edge of my seat. I think it's very masterfully suspenseful. I think if you go in not knowing what the movie's about, like, it's impossible to predict what's going to happen.
Which we didn't when we went in. We
knew nothing. We didn't even.
The reason we watched this movie is because Phil's partner Julius loves this movie called Miss March, which is a movie no one's seen.
It's a
really
raunchy teen comedy from like 2002 that nobody's seen, and it's by the whitest kids you know, the comedian group, and one of them was the director. Zach Kreger was the director of Barbarian. We're like, we gotta go see it, and then we were like, it's getting really good reviews, so maybe it's actually a good movie. And we went in completely blind, and
first week it came out, we saw it.
The movie Miss March is very dated. It's very like low bar comedy. So we weren't expecting, like, Barbarian has like, really thoughtful themes and like analysis, especially related to like gender, that we never thought would have been coming from the same director who brought us that. So there was the surprise element of that, but also just it's just a great movie if you don't know what to expect and if you're willing to invest. It's silly in some ways. Like, the premise is silly if you boil down to it. And when I've showed some people it, including my family, not everybody fell in love with it because they weren't willing to invest in some of the directions that it goes. But if you like surprises and twists and literally being like jarred in the middle of the movie, completely switching POVs out of nowhere, and taking time to get to to get all of the pieces of the puzzle, then this is a great movie for you. And Kat always says that she doesn't get scared of movies very often, and I remember in the theater, like, literally seeing her like holding back, like yelling at the main character because of the situation.
Oh my God.
I was genuinely like on the edge of my seat. I was genuinely like, I want to say scared. I do want to say scared because I think it was just really realistic. The whole Airbnb situation, which again we're not going to spoil the movie, but the premise of the very light premise of this movie is this girl that goes to an Airbnb, and things happen, and it's just such a realistic premise, and I think especially if you're a woman, I think you're gonna feel the things that she feels, and you've have felt the things she's felt, and they just heighten it to a really big extent. And I think there are so many times you could drop the ball and be preachy about it, but they never do. They're very, very thoughtful with everything they do, and it's just a scary movie, man.
It's also
It's so good.
it's also funny. Like
Mhm.
I think
Yeah, it is.
And she's
horror and
such
comedy
a bad, good main character because you really do want to yell at her.
You're really
I
like,
was even
what are
talking
you
about
doing?
yeah, there's a lot of that, but I was even talking about like Justin Long as
Mhm.
a character in this, is an actor. He plays a character in this movie, and he's so funny. Like he also he does some like really shitty things, but he's also like it. My favorite horror movies often are comedies. That's why I love the Chucky franchise so much, and I love a movie that can balance both. And this is maybe one of the best examples of 1 minute I'm laughing out loud, and the next minute I'm on the edge of my seat.
What's interesting is that we had recently saw Talk to Me, which I think both main characters were aggravating in such different ways. Because you really like the main character, Barbarian. You're aggravated in a way of like, why did you go through
You
that
want her to
door?
be safe.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
want her to be safe though. You genuinely like, oh, I care for this character. It sucks that you're such a good person and keep making these mistakes. And good person, you could analyze if she actually is or not, or she just like kind of a martyr. But like, she's a complicated character in that way. Talk to Me is a very similar instance where the main character is doing things you are questioning, but you hate her from the beginning, and there's no going back. And it's so interesting because we saw the movie, and I was like, yeah, that's a 3.5 star movie. It was fine. And every time I go to my letterbox, I deduct it. It's now 2.5 stars, I think, because I just continue every time I think about it. I hate that movie more and more to that main character.
I think I've moved it down to. I think it's at a 3, but I think that's a really good comparison because I think it started out really interesting and it just got frustrating as it goes on. It's a really difficult line to toe. I think there's a reputation of horror characters being idiots, being annoying, putting themselves in danger, and like I think movies have been more savvy about that in the last like 2 decades since it was such a trope, especially in like the 70s and 80s slashers. But Talk to Me, and I know we're kind of the minority opinion here. I know a lot
Yeah,
of
because
people
people
really
like it.
I know a lot of people really like Talk to Me, but that was the feeling I had when I was watching it. The like feeling of frustration where it's like, I know it's by design that this character is unlikable and making bad decisions, but I think Barbarian does it in a good way where I understand why she's doing what she's doing. Talk to Me, I didn't understand or relate, and I was just frustrated.
Yeah, I haven't seen that one yet, but it's on my list. But yeah, I do
Shouldn't
it does
be.
kind of annoy me sometimes when like the characters you're like, "What are you doing?" And the girl in Barbarian is definitely like there's one moment where I think I screamed at the TV, "Girl, come on." Like but I think that, the twist in that movie was so crazy where it's funny that you guys said about how early you saw it because the first time I heard of the movie was like Kat posted a review or something about how much she liked it. And then like weeks later, I feel like was when the buzz started building up about the movie. And I was like, man, Kat and Phil were ahead of the curve on this one.
It was a coincidence. We knew that director.
And then I saw a lot of buzz saying like, don't go in without knowing about it.
Yeah.
Don't know
Mhm.
about it. Don't know what it's about. So I knew like the bare minimum when I went to watch it too for the podcast to talk about it with Kat. And I would suggest anyone watch it that way because some of the things that happened in that movie, I was just like, whoa, what?
And
It's
that's
like
me saying that too, because I love spoiling endings.
yeah, exactly,
Me too.
exactly. But I think the experience of going in not knowing a lot and then just like the places that movie goes and like the way that the tone shifts even and even the color schemes and like how it looks and how it feels.
Oh my god, yeah.
That the movie, it's just so clever the way that they do everything.
It's a masterpiece. I really enjoy it.
All right, Kat, what's your number 5?
My number 5 is a movie that's always stuck with me, and that's 10 Cloverfield Lane.
Ooh.
I've actually never seen any of the other Cloverfield movies, which is interesting. I
neither.
watched this, I want to say randomly. I don't really remember when I watched it, but what I really like about it is that it's definitely a thriller. It's a character-driven movie. So if you guys don't know what it's about this girl who's trapped in this room, and then you find out John Goodman's character kind of put her there, and then you realize as the movie unravels why she was put there. And you have so many different things going through your mind. It's kind of a barbarian situation where you're like, well, I know the expectations of what this means. Is that what it means? Is he telling the truth? Is he a good gaslighter? And it's just three people in this movie, and it makes your heart beat a lot. And the ending, I know, is where people kind of say, oh, I think that's where it like went to left field and it ruined the movie, but I actually think it makes the movie. I think it's a really cool ending, and it's a good movie. It is very Final Girl in some ways, but it's not really a slasher. It's definitely a horror movie, but I honestly consider it more of a thriller than anything.
Yeah, yeah, I think it's spooky and it's creepy, but there is like a thriller action element to that movie. I think that's really interesting.
I think I definitely agree. It's more psychological thriller than anything else. I really like it. I think it's a great character piece. I think Mary Elizabeth Winstead is a phenomenal actress, and I think that's one of her best roles. I think John Goodman really, really excels in both parts of his role when he's when you think he's this benevolent guy, and then when he turns out to not be. And I really like that it's kind of a movie that by all accounts shouldn't exist. Like, it really does not fit in the Cloverfield franchise. It feels
Thankfully,
like a completely different movie. And I haven't seen any other Cloverfield movies. I'm familiar with them, but I haven't seen
but you
them.
know what? They're aliens. They're it's like
It's
it's
Yeah.
Yeah. So
yeah.
this movie doesn't actually have monsters for them at all, for the most part. Well, I don't even remember. I haven't
The
seen it in a
end
while.
really is the only thing.
That was what I was thinking. But and I think that was like a really great move. I think it did something different. It kept you guessing, and it was a great character piece. And I really like it.
Yeah, I watched it a couple years ago, and I
I
was
think I was
surprised.
begging you. I was like,
I think so.
Morgan,
I
you
think
gotta
you
watch
had
it.
recommended it to me, and I'm always looking for good horror movies around the holiday. So I was like, okay, let me try it. And I was surprised. I also went in to this one not knowing much about it, which I would also recommend most people do, because it like the twists and turns in this one I think are also really interesting, and like how they do it, and just like the feeling of claustrophobia being in this like bunker for most of the movie. I thought really just gives it this creepy feeling of like, what can this character do? Like, she's sort of trapped.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay, so my number 5, I went back and forth a couple of times. I was like, no, it's gonna be this one. No, it's gonna be this one. But I'm gonna go ahead and pick my number 5 is It Follows.
You know what's so interesting about this movie is I hate this movie, but Phil doesn't understand why I hate this movie.
I love this
Fascinating.
movie.
So yeah, I watched it randomly a couple years ago because I was like bored. It was like late. I think it was during the pandemic. It was during the pandemic. It was like late August. I was like, time doesn't matter anymore. Spooky season starts now. I've heard this movie's good. Let's try it. And I thought it was just so good. It's like the perfect combination of having like a unique premise and also being menacing and having like actual scary stuff happening, but also not feeling like every other horror movie I've ever seen. Like, I like that the movie seems to take place almost out of time. Like, it feels like it's maybe in the 70s or 80s, but there's modern technology, but then there's also technology I've never seen before. One of these characters has a little like Kindle reader, but it's in like a little shell, like she's Ariel. So like you just can't place like when it's supposed to be taking place, like, so that gives it a weird sense of like timelessness. And no one's got their like iPhone out to do anything at any point really in the movie. And
Even beyond the time period, the seasons are inconsistent. One scene they'll be wearing jackets, the next scene they'll be in summer clothes.
I do remember that, and that
there's so
being
many
a jarring
artful
part.
decisions in this movie.
Yeah.
It's my number 4 pick, so I'm glad we're talking about it already.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. So I just really liked it. And I like the way that they set up this unique mythology. And I also, which is that it's kind of like a horror movie STD that they have, which is it passes from person to person. And
Do you like the main character? That's always the thing I didn't love about this movie. Is I didn't like her.
That's interesting. I wasn't super heavily invested in her, I would say. I wasn't like, "Oh man, my girl, what's gonna
I
happen
don't
to
remember her
her?"
name.
Exactly, I don't remember her name, but
I think it was Jay, but
I think you're right.
I can see why she's not like the most memorable protagonist, but I think the role she plays in the movie is perfect. Like she is an anagram for an assault victim. Like she is effectively sexually abused to get this demon, and I think her response to it is very much the numbness angle, and I think that they play it so well, and I think it fits so well with this movie and the menace of how her life is changed and everything can look normal, but this one thing walking towards her can be like literally the end of her world. Like I think I'll agree she's not the most exciting from a character perspective, and I think she's the perfect protagonist for this movie. And
But I
it's why
think
I love it so much.
the numbness, I think, is what's interesting of why maybe I always felt disconnected because I've only seen the movie when it came out. Like I have not seen this movie since it hit theaters. Like I saw it in theaters and I don't remember that much, but I remember feeling disconnected. Like and maybe it was the numbness of the character, just like, and obviously it makes sense for what she went through and her character arc. But I think you're so used to horror movies that it's, you know, these shouting or scream queens, you know?
I kind of like they went in a different direction in this case. You know, I think.
Yeah, me
Oh, wait, go
too.
ahead.
I was gonna say me too. I like that she's like a sort of a quieter character. You can kind of see that she was the sort of bubbly character in the beginning of the
Mm.
movie, and then after what happens to her, she really shuts down. And I thought that was interesting because, to your point, Kat, usually, you know, if it's the shambling zombies coming at you, you're screaming and running, but she's just kind of like, uh oh.
I also
Sure.
think the monster is just really fucking creepy in this movie.
So scary. I will say it's one of those movies that I think about more often than I think about a lot of other horror movies. I was in like a PetSmart the other day, and there was like an old lady kind of like shambling towards me, and I was like, if this isn't a perfect It Follows moment, like I don't know what is. And like I was like,
I
should I not be
forgot about
making
that old
eye
lady.
contact?
I call it the It Follows effect. I have that all the time when someone's like walking towards you in the distance and it just feels uneasy. It's just, and that
Yeah.
movie did it to me and it stuck with me after all these years. I think there's always something creepy about the idea of being followed, like especially at night in the dark, if someone's just like following in your path. I think this really plays on that. And I think the slowness makes it even scarier. I think the way it changes forms, I think there's a lot of shots in this movie that very purposefully leave it unclear if it's the demon following them or just someone randomly walking in the background, down to the final shot of the movie where you
Yeah.
don't actually know if they're still being followed. And I
I
really
think
like. Go
yeah,
ahead.
that's like one of the creepiest things to me is that like it's hard for them to tell because they don't know, and they're sometimes the only one seeing the person too. So there's like, is it just a normal person walking towards you, or is it the demon? And just the way that those characters, like the physicality of those characters too, was also very creepy.
Definitely agree.
All right, I guess so. My number 5 was It Follows. Phil's number 4 was It Follows. So, Kat, I think that's going to bring it to your number 4.
Was not It Follows. Okay, so but it was another Mary Elizabeth Winstead
Uh oh.
movie,
I know
Final
it.
Destination 3,
Yeah.
which we're gonna watch later in this month because it really is just one of my favorite movies, and I love it's my favorite horror franchise is Final Destination. The reason I always say it is because a lot of, and I've talked about this earlier, a lot of the horror movies I watched was because my friend Luke. So I got into Scream because of that. I got into Nightmare on Elm Street. I got into what else did I get into because of him?
Halloween.
Halloween, yeah, those type of movies. But Final Destination is a movie I found. I remember I was sitting at my grandmother's house and I was just flipping the channels and I saw Final Destination 2 and I was a big Heroes fan. And Ali Larder was there. So I was like, "Oh, she's from Heroes. I guess I should watch this." And I watched it and I just loved the idea of this irony and just the themes that are being played of the idea of, okay, these people are supposed to die, they escape death, can they escape death again? And obviously the kills are just really cool, but there is just more, and I'm surprised by this because it's not really a character driven franchise. That every movie is for the most part a new character. Sometimes there'll be returning characters, but very rarely. It is really about the theme. It's about the idea of you can't escape death. And we were talking about this, I believe it was in the Bride of Chucky podcast, where is death an actual slasher? Is he a character? And I always consider him to be this invisible slasher. And sometimes they do survive, sometimes they don't. But what I liked about this one in particular is, I really liked all the characters. I think they're all likable. I like the death of the roller coaster because you're always on a roller coaster. You're like, is this the last time I'm gonna survive this? My earphones just died, so I might have to take them off after this.
Oh no.
But yeah, and I enjoyed that was from a female perspective. The other two movies were from a male perspective, if I remember correctly. So it was the first time we saw that. The tanning bed scene is iconic. Oh, so Abby says the tanning bed scene sticks with me as much as the log truck scene. I will say I think the log truck scene still does stay with me a little bit more.
Was that number 2? That was
That
in
was
the
2. Yeah,
Yeah,
that was
I
number
still
2.
if I see a log like one of those log trucks, I will not be behind it. I can't do it.
Right now, right?
We hear you.
Yeah.
Very good. I think the elevator scene in 2 also gives me like, oh man, that's a creepy one. I think that one of the scariest ones is the gymnast one because of the expectation.
That's a really good one. That was in 4, I think.
That was 4, yeah. And then so there's a lot of great kills in this, but 3, I think there are good kills, but I just genuinely like the characters, and I think they released on DVD 2 versions of the ending, so you get to choose if they died or not in the end. So I think that's kind of cool. And there's just some good arcs. Like I think like the sister, she's in the movie, so you get to see them interact. The guy from The Luck of the Irish is in the movie. And I think everyone has good chemistry. But so I feel like the characters are just as good as the kills, where some of the Final Destination movies, especially as you get to the end, it's more about the kills than it is about the characters.
I really like Final Destination as a franchise, but I'm also very much a person who values character continuance. I think that's kind of my sweet spot.
Final Destination doesn't do that.
And Final Destination definitely doesn't do that. Aside for Ali Larder's character,
he shows up twice, and I think
he shows up in 1 and 2. Aside for her, I don't really think there's any instances of continuance. You'll see. I think there's a cameo in in Final Destination 5 of characters from the first movie, but otherwise it's always a reset, which I think prevents it. Whenever I'm listing my favorite horror franchises, I don't usually go Final Destination for that reason, but I agree with everything you said about what makes it great, about the kills, and they're the ones that really stick with you. I think there's so many that you can really point to. I like 3 a lot. I think the first one edges it out for me still. I think the first I enjoyed Devon Sawa's character, the lead character, in that a little more than Mary Elizabeth Winstead's character in this movie. And I thought that some of the gimmicks in the movie weren't my favorite, like the photos premeditating who the killer was.
Interesting.
That's so funny.
Says they like that. They like
I wasn't the biggest fan of that, and I also didn't love some of the turns that some of the side characters made. McKinley, if you remember him, I think he might be the one from Luck of the Irish.
I don't remember what happened in the end with him. Well, he survived in the end.
He tries to take. I don't want to spoil the movie, but
right. Oh, who does the
he's like the goth guy. What was that?
There's something with the firecrackers too, like the fireworks. There's something I feel like he was involved with that.
Yeah. He was involved with that. Okay, sorry. The Luck of the Irish guy is the good guy.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I'm like, he survives in
the bad guy, the one who he's like one of the goth. There's like a goth girl.
Right. Oh, okay. He does.
I thought they were kind of
killing people. Yeah.
I thought they were kind of insufferable, but I agree. I do like the main trio. I like the ending a lot. I think like you said, the kind of choose your own ending on the DVD. I always go with the sadder ending, but I think that was really well done, a really good end cap for the movie. So I see why you like it so much.
I just think it's like everything I enjoy in a movie, and again, the female led aspect is really cool, and I want more Final Destinations. It's a sad franchise because it's not like a Scream or Halloween where there's a lot of people that like it. I think there's a lot of people that like the idea of it, but there's no like Chucky fandom for Final Destination.
Yeah.
I think that's so sad. Like I just feel like it's such a good franchise that is such a lone wolf.
I think they just need one more great movie because the last few, I think that
they use a lot of 3D gimmicks in the last ones.
I think, which is sad because I actually think Final Destination 5, I think that was the big 3D one, was a good movie. I just think that they relied too heavily on bad CG in 3D.
Mm-hmm.
But I think they just need one more good movie to revitalize that franchise.
Did you know? Okay, so I wanted to see how many movies there were in the Final Destination because I think I saw 1
There's
and
5.
2. But did you know that there's also 2 comic books and 9 novels?
I did not
I did
know
not.
the 2
Cat, get
comic
reading.
books.
The Wikipedia also says this is kind of wild. I've never heard this. It's based on an unproduced spec script, which was originally written for the X Files.
I did know that in the back of my mind, which I think is very fun.
That's so fun. That's crazy.
I'm excited for us to watch Final Destination for the podcast because I'm curious. Well, you haven't seen the third one, right?
I haven't. No,
You haven't seen the third one. I'm also
Mhm.
curious how Amy's gonna feel about it because I don't think she's gonna like it.
I don't think so either. I've seen the first 2, I believe, because obviously, like everybody else, I'm traumatized by that car accident scene. But
I'll think about that on a daily basis if I'm
oh
being
god, every time I'm in the car, I'm like, oh no, not today. Final Destination. Okay, so I think is it my number 4
Your
now?
Yeah,
number
it's your
4.
number
Yeah.
4 now.
You threw me off, Phil, by having the same 4 as my 5.
I wonder if that'll happen again.
I know. So my number 4 is The Shining.
That
Uh,
was almost made my list.
yeah, it was it's a classic. It's a Stanley Kubrick movie, but I think saw it for the first time last year or the year before, so I saw it pretty late. So I went into it knowing, that it's, kind of a classic, that people love it. So kind of went in with a lot of baggage. I was like, I don't know, can it be as good as people really say? And I really liked it. I just feel like the weird to say, but the vibes are bad in that movie. Like immediately everything is a little bit off kilter, a little bit off
Mhm.
center, and it really puts you into that like horror movie space. The Overlook Hotel is just so creepy as a place. Like I ended up reading the Stephen King novel, which the novel is like fairly different from the movie, but I do feel like it captures that feeling of like this building that's just kind of weird and creepy, and there's just like the bad feelings that sort of attach itself, that the iconic hallway carpet and all those moments that you've seen like a million times, even if you haven't seen The Shining. Like I had obviously seen like the blood elevator and the 2 creepy little girls and red rum and all of that, but it's so funny as you're watching the movie, you kind of forget that you have all of this like cultural osmosis knowledge of the movie because it kind of sucks you in. You're like, you kind of feel like you're in this claustrophobic setting that is this hotel that's shut down for the winter, that is inaccessible pretty much by anyone. And I thought that it was super super interesting, really well shot, really well directed, really creepy. And I really like, having read now about some of the background behind the scenes stuff with like how many times they made Shelley Duvall do that scene with the
Yeah.
baseball bat. Like,
And
oh
she did
man.
wasn't she like, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't she also like have a mental episode because of like all the stuff that happened in The Shining, or am I wrong with that?
I think you're right.
Yeah,
Okay.
I don't know if
I
that's
think
like a sensationalized thing or if it's true, but I think it's true.
I'm not sure if it was just The Shining or if it was like Hollywood in general kind of at that point, but certainly The Shining didn't help. I think Stanley Kubrick was like kind of renowned for being not the easiest director to work for, and they made her do that scene on the
Yeah, on the
steps
step.
where she's
Yeah.
swinging the bat like what, like hundreds of times or something. And that scene, like her character is like incredibly emotional, like crying, screaming,
Mhm.
like swinging. I can't imagine spending like an entire day doing that, and that's basically like what she had to do. So to me, it just makes her performance in that movie so much more impactful and like makes me feel like, oh my God, like she really like she went for it in every take. She is like hugely emotional, screaming, crying, running, like, and then she had to do those takes probably over and over and over again. So I feel like you really do feel like the level of terror that she's at makes the movie even scarier.
No, I'm in the complete same boat as you too because I didn't watch it when I was younger. I watched it me and my brother when I was in South Carolina for like a convention, and I was staying with my brother. He lived in South Carolina at the time, so I stayed with him for a little while. I stayed with him for like over a week, and we were walking around the town, and there was this like old school movie theater, and we're just like, oh, let's go see a movie. Like we got nothing else to do today, and they were showing old movies, and one of them was The Shining, and we were both like, we'd never seen The Shining before, so we actually like saw it on the big screen.
That's so
And
cool.
yeah, and it was really, and it was kind of the same effect. We were like, oh, I don't know, like I know so much about the movie, I know the ending. There's no, is this gonna be like a Sixth Sense situation where you literally know the twist is gonna be that great? And it was, because it never was about the twist, right? It really is
No,
about
yeah.
the creepiness. It is about the claustrophobia. It's about the house. It's more than Jack Nicholson going crazy. It really is about everything else surrounding it, and the build up to it. So. I think it's a fantastic movie, and I, really was close to my top 5.
I think you guys said almost everything I have to say, but I think in my book, the perfect horror movie is the perfect intersection of character and like character,
Yes.
setting, and suspense. And I think The Shining is known for all three of those. I think all three members of the Torrance family are very well fleshed out and like expertly performed, including Danny Torres. It was a really strong child performance, and Shelley Duvall is amazing, and Jack Nicholson's obviously amazing. I think the setting of the Overlook Hotel, obviously Stanley Kubrick knows how to do a shot, and like there's so many iconic shots in this movie. Like Morgan mentioned, the twins, the bathtub scene, the hedge maze, the final shot of Jack Torrance. I really love that. I love little things that you don't notice, like the architecture of the Overlook Hotel doesn't make sense. Like if you try to chart it out, like it literally is incomprehensible. It's impossible. Like the turns that they make one place versus another. And I think that's like such a unique detail that just makes rewatching and trying to pay attention to that like even more valuable. And it's just a great film. Not on my top 5, but in my top 10.
Yeah, yeah. I think about like that shot early on in the movie where they're driving on the
Sure.
the road, and they turn around and you see the overlook for the first time. And it's just like just from the beginning when they start to go to the hotel, it's like impressive and scary all at the same time.
I don't know if you've seen what's the sequel called?
Dr. Sleep.
Dr. Sleep. They spend a lot of time in the Overlook Hotel there, and they do a very good job of recreating the.
Yeah.
I still haven't seen Dr. Sleep. I should.
It was good. I liked it. I thought they did a good job, and especially to recreating that sort of hotel.
I want to see the documentary where they talk about the creation of the movie, because I've heard good stuff about that.
I haven't seen that.
It's on my list.
Seen that one. I want to see that one. I saw one that was, and I don't think I watched the whole thing because I hadn't seen The Shining, but I watched one about people who were like really obsessed with like trying to read subliminal messages into The Shining. So they'll be like, well, there was a can in the background with a Native American on it. So that means that this is referencing this history thing from like, I was like, okay, no, I don't think so.
There's a lot of people trying to read deeper into it. There's one very popular fan theory. I don't know the evidence off the top of my head that the whole movie is allegorical of Jack is actually like molesting his son. And apparently there's like some really like solid evidence to that, especially like in the beginning scenes before they go to the Overlook. Like they're in a doctor's office and there's, I don't remember off the top.
Oh, I remember. Yeah. Okay. I remember the doctor's office and all that. Yeah.
But, I think it's great that it's the kind of movie where you really can have your kind of crackpot conspiracy theories and find evidence in the movie because it's so subjective and arbitrary, and there's so much hidden in so much to be uncovered throughout the movie, and it doesn't make an effort to explain everything to you either.
I know, I like that.
Space, it's the whole hotel is your own little canvas that you can play with. So.
Yeah, I think it rewards like close watching, like rewatches. So it's like one of those movies where you can actually like sometimes you see something and you're like, oh my God, that was so scary or so, so great. But I don't know that I would, watch it a bunch of times again. And I feel like The Shining, you could just kind of throw on The Shining because you'll, if you want to hyperfixate on one aspect of it, you can definitely do that.
Yeah, I'm probably not watching Barbarian again anytime soon.
Phil, what is your number 3?
My number 3, while not as artful as The Shining, is a favorite of mine. Happy Death Day.
Ah,
I
Kat has also recommended this one to me multiple times, and it's on my list for this year for sure.
Good.
I think that Happy Death Day is, again, it's another movie that really well balances the horror and the comedy. And
You know what's
when I say
interesting, Phil,
horror,
too?
what was
When
that?
we first became friends, this was one of the first movies I think we talked about was Happy Death Day.
Because I love this movie and I know you love this movie.
Mhm.
And I think, like I was saying, I think it really balances the horror and the comedy. And when I say horror, this isn't a scary movie, but like it's bloody. Like it very much relies on its
It's a
slasher.
slasher film.
It's a slasher. Like it very much uses that aesthetic to its advantage. And I just like how weird. I like how weird it is. The premise is it's Groundhog Day, but it's a slasher movie. And I think it's anchored by one of the best lead performances.
Tree? Her name is Tree, right?
Her name was Tree, yeah. Jessica Ross
She
plays her.
is one of the best final girls. She's funny, but she is so like determined and smart. And I honestly think is the best final girl.
Ooh.
I think an argument can be made there. You know, I think this movie wouldn't work if she didn't work, and I think she works beyond any expectations it should be. I think the actress is phenomenal. I think the writing is phenomenal. I'm shocked we don't see her in more places because I think she really I don't love the sequel.
That second one didn't do well.
I don't love Happy Death Day to You, which
It's
trades
not
out
horrendous. It's just not as good.
it trades out the slasher for more sci-fi leaning, and I don't think it worked, but she is still phenomenal. Like I think it's worth watching just for the continuation of that character's arc. And like the movies are good to watch back to back. Like it's Groundhog Day style, and they literally recreate the same day across two different movies that came out
that's
years apart.
really fun.
But it's a great movie. I think everybody should watch Happy Death Day, and I think if you love Happy Death Day, you should watch the sequel, even knowing it's not going to be as good. Just for her, like it's a standout performance. I'd be shocked if we don't see more of her at some point because she's just too good to be passed up, this actress.
I think it's sad that it's a movie that's not talked about a lot. It's a movie that I think a lot of people have forgotten about. And I don't even know how many people watched it when it came out, but I remember I liked it just because it's like, oh, there's, it has the final girl kind of idea. But yeah, when you watch it, she's brilliant, and there's good twists in it too, especially towards the end. It's a good suspense movie towards the end because you think it's gonna be like, oh, it's just Groundhog's Day, but it gets better than that. And also, I think the slasher Babyface, I think his name is Babyface. I forget his
Oh yeah, the baby mask.
Yeah, he's actually pretty good slasher. They do have like kind of a scream reveal where you find out who the slasher is, and that works really well because it honestly it does it blends Scream and Groundhog's Day because it is aware of itself.
I think I love a good Groundhog Day plot. I think
Me too.
We always talk about the Legends episode. One of the best episodes is the Hedgehog Day. With
Damari.
And but I actually don't love Groundhog Day as a movie, like the actual movie.
I haven't even seen it.
I think it's one of the weaker examples of. I'm sorry if I'm offending you. But,
it's fine. It's fine. I was more shocked that Kat hadn't seen it than that you didn't love it. Because it's like, how do you avoid it? It's on TBS like every single day.
I actually missed it.
Matilda instead.
You were watching Matilda and you're cowering in fear. But I think a Groundhog Day plot really hedges on its lead character. And I think Bill Murray obviously is an amazing actor, but I never really fell for that character. But I think that what Legends did with their episode and what this movie does is just like they centered it around the perfect character and did a very believable arc. I think on paper it's formulaic. Relive the same day until you change, until you like learn the error of your ways. But it's the devil's in the details, and I think these movies got the detail. These instances of the plot got the details right.
And there's some good supporting characters enough that it kind of carries the movie. But yeah, she works and it's good. Recommend it. Abby said that
romance too. Actually, Happy Death Day is a good romance too. I think the lead romance is pretty solid, and I don't usually care much about the romance in a horror movie. So.
No, neither do I.
No, they're actually pretty solid. They actually the only tolerable thing of the second movie is them.
Yeah.
So.
All right, Kat, what is your number 3?
Mine is You're Next. Another movie that I think many horror movies, like if you're a hardcore horror fan, you're going to know this movie, but if you're just a casual horror fan, you probably don't. It's about, and again, I love a slasher film, but it's about this girl who visits her boyfriend's family, and she is in a mix of people trying to kill this family. And we learn that she's a survivalist, that her father taught her how to literally survive. And the whole movie is her trying to survive this killing. And there's twists and turns that I won't spoil of what happens in the movie, of why this is all happening. But there's good masks. They have like these like animal masks that are the people trying to kill everybody. And she's a really good lead. She's a really great action hero. She defies what a final girl is. I think it was really the first time I saw where she doesn't go screaming. She's trying to save everybody. She's like, I've lived this life. I know how to survive. And there's no moment where she screams and is afraid. She's that just takes action. And there's a lot of great kills here. There's like the visible wire you get to see where people cutting each other's throats and stuff like that. And it's just such a fantastic movie. And it's a movie that's always stayed with me since I've seen it.
I feel like now I understand why when you saw Ready or Not, you were just like, "Oh, I've seen this movie." Because it's kind of the premise sounds like not exactly the same, but similar
It's
enough.
very similar. And for me, I thought You're Next did it a lot better.
I was gonna make the same comparison. I think Ready or Not is a more comedic take on Your Next, and I think Your Next is comedic. I think that there's a lot of really strong comedy in the movie, and one of the things I really like about it is how it veers between comedy, action, and sincerity. You talked about the tripwire, like slashing someone's neck. Like there's like actually like a very moving moment when that happens where like shit gets serious and like all the actors play it straight and it's intense and it's heavy. And I like that the movie is able to balance those angles, those different aspects of, sincerity and horror, like horror at the action around them, but also like there's a lot of funny moments and there's also really great action. I think, like you said, she's a great lead. I remember when I first saw this movie, which was the year it came out.
That's weird. I didn't see it until remember the Final Girl script I was doing. I watched the movie because I was doing research for that for the Final Girl.
That's good. It's good research for any dissection of a Final Girl, because obviously this is a dissection of the Final Girl. It's the capable Final Girl. But I remember when I saw it, I was a little put off by. She felt too capable. I was like, this just it felt hand of the author to me, but I think I was being too reactionary because I think rewatches after the fact. I appreciate the dissection and the going in the opposite direction of what we would normally do. And obviously it led to really great action and there's a lot of great twists throughout. It's a very good movie. It's not in my top 10, but it would probably be in my top 15.
What's very interesting about this movie is that it is such an important movie to pop culture, but people don't know it. So it is literally step one to a lot of movies you see now of honestly even Halloween the remake. I feel like those movies were possible with the Jamie Lee Curtis like taking on everything and being a survivalist because You're Next did it first, and obviously Halloween did slashers first. But You're Next, it was really the first time we've ever seen a scream queen do the exact opposite of what you expect.
I think definitely. It was a very important stepping stone. I think movies were going in that direction. Like you had your Sidney Prescott who was fighting back, but like this was the first time. This was the first time that you have the Final Girl like literally on the offensive like the whole movie. And I think, like you said, Halloween 2018 very much continued that trend with Laurie Strode. So I think it's a very important movie for that reason.
Yeah, I just added it to my list because it sounds
I thought you
awesome.
guys watched it on the podcast before.
I watched it for another podcast. So I went on one of a fellow comic book creators horror podcast that they do. It's called I think Progressive, I think it's called. So they talk about like gender and sexuality in horror movies. So they invited me to be on one. They're like, literally pick whatever movie you want. I'm like, well, one of my favorite movies is You're Next, and you guys haven't covered it yet. So we're like, all right, cool, let's do You're Next. I watched it for that, but I'm almost like, I want to do Final Destination 3, but I almost want to change to You're Next because I'm like, oh man, I'm curious how you feel about it, Morgan, but also like I think it's a movie. There's a lot to talk about in it. So I'm like,
if you're looking for a movie that your audience will like, I think You're Next is the one. But I know you love Final Destination. So
I do love Final Destination. Maybe I can convince them watching November Final Destination.
We'll continue spooky season. Okay, I guess that takes me to my number 3. So my number 3 is Paranormal Activity.
We were talking
We
about
talked
this
about it yesterday.
yesterday.
That's too funny. Yeah, when I went to go see Paranormal Activity, a friend and I went to go see the movie. We hadn't heard anything about it except that it was scary. So we went in knowing nothing, which you can't watch the first Paranormal Activity anymore knowing nothing. I don't think that's even possible because it became such a big hit. But going in knowing nothing, man, that was one of the movies on my list where I had to sleep with like the lights on for a couple nights afterwards. I remember we were in the theater, and as the movie was going on, we just kept getting lower and lower and lower in our theater seats until at the end we were like this because we're like, oh God, what's happening now? What's happening now? I just think the first movie is so creepy because it is that found footage, but it's not like shaky out in the woods Blair Witch found footage. It's more like home movies, which makes it feel like a little bit more like, oh, okay, it felt real without being like the camera jogging all the time. Although they do a little bit of that. But I just think honestly, I think it's so scary just because of that shot where she stands by the bed and watches him. There is nothing I think creepier to me than that shot in the Paranormal Activity movies. And then when it fast forwards and she just kind of sways, but she's standing there for hours just watching him sleep. I think there's just something inherently scary about when you're sleeping and you don't know what's going on around
Sure.
you. And then the idea that like the person who sleeps next to you is just looming for hours, I think is very scary. I mean, obviously it is a possession story, so maybe not Kat's favorite.
I've actually never seen it. Yeah, I feel like I've been already. Life has spoiled it for me. So.
Yeah, it became such a big phenomenon after that movie came out, and they filmed it on like, a stick of gum and a dream essentially. So
Sure.
they made so much money off of that movie. I'm sure they filmed it in the director's house. I
Wow.
believe,
I
like
didn't
the
know
first
that.
one. I think so, which I feel like I'd have to move because, man, it was so creepy. But yeah, they didn't spend a lot of money, and it just took
Made a
off.
lot of
And
money.
then there were like parodies of it everywhere,
Maybe a
and
second one too, which I don't think
I
was
think it
they
has
as
a lot of
successful.
sequels.
they continued to make Paranormal Activity movies with varying levels of success. So the second
Yeah.
one I went to see in the movie theater, and I thought it worked a lot better with like Dolby surround sound movie theater because you could kind of hear like if something was like rustling in the background or like a thing dropped. Whereas if you watch it at home and your sound quality isn't great, you're just like, why is everyone scared? Like nothing's happening. I'm just watching a kitchen. The third one actually is more scary, more along the lines of the first one because they go back in time to like when the little girls were young. So it's like 90s or 80s technology, and it's like one of the big cameras that like I used to have back in the day. And there's one scene where to try to capture the downstairs, the mother's boyfriend puts the camera on like a a fan swivel, so it will swivel over here and look at this side, and then it'll swivel over there. And obviously they do fun things with the camera slowly turning in
Oh,
the
that's
third
fun.
one. But I do think that there's just something so simple about the first one that's so off-putting about the idea of like your home is turning against you for no reason that you can figure out, and then now like the person who's in your home is also starting to act weird, and like what's going on with that, where it's like the slow escalation over the course of the movie, where it's like at first it's like, oh, I'm sure it's nothing, and they think it's a joke, and then by the end it's like, oh no, this is bad.
Yeah, I think it's Paranormal Activity. I have seen the first one, but it's a bit of a horror blind spot for me where I haven't seen any of the sequels. So it's definitely things I need to put on my list.
Yeah.
It's funny. Kat mentioned we talked about it yesterday, and the reason we talked about it is because I watched Blair Witch yesterday for the first
Oh,
time. And
I have that on my list. I watched it like a long time ago, when I was younger, but I remember being just mostly bored by it, and I'm
I
wondering if it would play differently now or if I would still feel the same.
I expected to be bored, but I didn't want to watch it. My siblings wanted to watch it, and I was surprised. I liked it a lot. I thought
He
I
was
had
surprised
this.
that he had not seen it because he thought he had seen it
I
also.
thought I had seen it too. Like in my head, I convinced, and then when I was watching, I was like, I haven't seen this. I somehow convinced myself that I saw it a long time ago. But I think I had this idea of it in my head as being like the bad kind of found footage where like you can't see what's going on most of the time, and like it's contrived that they're filming the whole time. And I didn't think it was the case there. Like I actually thought that I thought the character relationships were solid and felt real and like realized. And I thought that the sense of dread that creeps over them as it goes on is like very palpable. I thought it was suspenseful. I thought you could see most of what's going on, and obviously not everything. I think that's what makes a good found footage movie, and I think that's something that Paranormal Activity has as well. I think I definitely owe it a rewatch because I haven't seen it since it came out, which was so long ago.
Oh,
I remember
yeah.
things I didn't like about it is I like found footage, but I don't love like the blue found footage, like the night vision found footage.
Oh, yeah.
I remember a lot of that for Paranormal Activity, and but I do definitely there are key visuals in that movie that stuck with me, like the scene that you talked about of her standing over her husband while she sleeps. Like that's definitely seared into my brain. It's the thing I thought about first when you mentioned Paranormal Activity. So I think it's definitely worthy of a top 5 list.
I remember
And-
like Scary Movie making fun of it, but that's
Yeah,
about
I
it.
remember Scary Movie also making fun of it. The sleep stuff I think was the stuff when I was like after I had seen that movie and I was like traumatized. I was like tried to go to bed that night and I was just like, oh my God. Where it's like this is exactly what happened in the movie. Like you hear a thump in your bedroom or something like that. That's just your house settling and you're like, the demon's coming for me now. I think that's also what makes it so scary is that everything that happens in that movie is kind of normal until it's suddenly not normal. So it's like, yeah, sometimes you hear weird noises in your house and it's just like the house settling. But here it's like a demon coming to get you. And it's like, sometimes you when you fall, you have a hard time falling asleep or you fall asleep and you're like, I wonder what's going on. And then like in this movie, it's like somebody's standing over your bed. So yeah, I think that just because it's so everyday in that movie and then it just escalates is what made it really scary.
Great.
So, okay. Kat, or are we back to Phil for your number 2?
I think so.
I think, okay,
Yeah.
Phil, your number 2.
Okay, my number 2 is one that I know Kat hasn't seen, and I don't think you have seen either, Morgan.
Oh, interesting.
But it is John Carpenter's The Thing from 1980.
Yeah,
Oh,
1982, excuse
I
me.
have not seen that one.
It's actually a movie that I watched a couple of months ago for the first time because I've always heard, like, in the horror fan community, I've always heard people talk about it as a great, but I don't think it's like the most heavily used in pop culture or heavily talked about, at least in like younger generations. So it's never been at the top of my list. And I watched it on a whim, and I was genuinely surprised just by like how unique and memorable it is as a movie. The premise is there's a team in the Arctic and an alien that can take over a person's body, infiltrates and perfectly mimic them. And they have to try to figure out who has been taken over by this alien. And it slowly makes its way through the team. And it's a bleak movie. Like it's very much about the feeling of paranoia and hopelessness settling in. And it gets to a point where it's like, nobody's spoilers. Nobody's making it out.
Yeah.
And it's just a matter of, will they be able to stop it before that happens? And, I think like we were saying about The Shining, it very purposefully doesn't answer all of the questions that it asks. You can leave the movie and you can debate, was this person a thing or not? What happened at the end? At what point did this person become a thing? At what point were they human? Is this person at the end of the movie a thing, or are they human? Like there's a lot that's left up to interpretation. And I really love that in a movie where when it's done right, like, I think it's very artful. And I think also, despite the fact that it came out in the 80s, like it's grotesque, it's horrifying. There's a particular scene with dogs, that's all I'll say, that is
Oh no.
that is very memorable, very much seared into my brain. So definitely recommend for fans of horror in general. I think I don't recommend as much to Kat because there's 0 female characters in the movie.
I'm looking at it now just to see like the visuals, and
Well,
I'm just like,
like,
I don't know if there's anything there for me, but
The
if you
cast
wanted to
is
watch
all
a movie one
dudes.
day.
I
You
recommend
put me in a good
to
mood.
everyone except Kat, but it's a good movie. I like it a lot.
Oh, I thought that Mary Elizabeth Winstead was in it for a second when I
She's,
looked
like,
at
in
the cast list, and I was like, "Is she in everything?" But no, it's
That would be
it's
the third movie
mostly
in our list today.
right. It's just mostly Kurt Russell. It looks like. All right, well, that's I guess I'm gonna have to add that to my list because that sounds
She is
creepy.
in the sequel.
Are you really?
sequel. There was a 2011 movie
Well,
that
there you go.
is technically a prequel to this movie, but is really just like remaking the movie, like shot for shot, practically.
That's so funny.
And yeah, she is in it. So
I appreciate that our list has been blessed by Mary Elizabeth Winstead in
Yeah,
multiple places.
I'm not complaining.
Kat, what is your number 2?
Mine's Happy Death Day, so we already talked about it.
yeah.
Oh,
But-
was it
but-
really? That's so funny. So yeah, what do you like about Happy Death Day?
For all the same reasons. I
Mhm.
really do like the lead. I think that it's just a really fun movie that I think plays with tropes of slashers enough where you're like, oh, it feels familiar. But it really, and I think mostly because of her, doesn't feel like any other slasher movie all at the same time. It really feels different from
It's
others. I can't compare it to anything else.
It's rare to get a movie, but especially a horror movie that's singularly focused on
Mhm.
like one character. Like even if you think of Halloween or Scream, like there's a lead,
an
there's a final
ensemble.
girl, but it's an ensemble, and the killer gets a lot of screen time. Babyface, really, we
No.
don't get any scenes with him without Tree, really, that I can remember. Like it
And
always,
he's hardly in the movie. Like it
And-
takes until halfway until the movie to even know he's a character.
yeah, and I think that's used to good effect. It makes him creepy as a specter, but also it means that we're only focusing on Tree. The entire runtime is dedicated to making her a strong character, and
Yeah.
it shows.
I agree.
That's awesome. Well, that's just gonna put it even higher up on my list. Of
I really
having to
think
watch
you'll
it.
enjoy it. I think you'll like Happy Death Day more than your next, but I think your next is you should watch.
Well, I did really like Ready or Not, honestly.
Oh, then I
So
think you'll love your next because I think it's a better version of that.
because I was
I
about to say
love
it
Ready
does
or
sound
Not.
like kind of a more fun, maybe even more fun version of Ready or Not, and I thought that was really fun movie.
I personally like Ready or Not better than Your Next, but I think
Ooh.
Your Next has a more interesting premise because of the lead. I just really like the comedy of Ready or Not.
Yeah,
Ready or
I
Not
did
is
really like the
funnier.
comedy. Yeah,
I think it's a little too
the family is
gothic,
crazy.
but
I like the gothic. I like the
I-
mansion setting. I loved
me
how
too.
ridiculous the characters looked, like that grandma.
Oh, the
I love-
grandma was
Aileen.
so wild, so crazy looking.
and I love the song, the run run run. Song.
Oh,
that I'll agree that the music was good. But yeah, your next is in the comments below, guys. Let us know your next.
you're next or Ready or Not.
I smell another cat-filled Twitter poll debate.
Yeah,
I think
seriously.
we're gonna have to do it.
We can answer some questions here. Okay, my number 2, a classic,
Ooh,
Scream. I feel like it's number 2 for a lot of reasons. I love that it's like a meta commentary on the slasher genre. I love that it is both creepy and funny. I love that they were like willing to kill off their big star in like the first 10 minutes of the movie, but they still put her on all the posters. But also I just think the rewatchability of Scream is like, I've probably seen Scream like a handful of times in just the last couple of years, and every time I think, oh man, I just watched Scream like 2 or 3 years ago, like am I really going to want to watch it again? And I'll start the movie and I'll be like, nope, still great.
And I think what works for this movie, and me and Phil were actually talking about this yesterday, is that they continuously change Ghostface, so they have an opportunity to reinvent themselves because it's always going to be a new identity, even if Ghostface kind of has the same deal a lot of the times. And Sydney, obviously, she's a great lead. She was that stepping stone of like, all right, how do you make it different from Jamie Lee Curtis to someone who can run up the stairs and come back down the stairs?
Yeah.
So yeah, no, it's such a good movie, and it's really what made me love horror. There's gateways, but this is what this sealed the deal for me.
Yeah.
I don't think you could do a top 10 or a top 5 list of horror without including Scream. It's just done too much for the genre. It's a amazing movie, like you said, Morgan. It's so rewatchable. It's maybe one of the tightest scripts in film.
Mhm.
The way it just carries you through the whole movie.
You don't get
And
bored.
No.
You don't get bored. And something that the first movie cracks that I don't know if every movie after cracks is just the mystery doesn't actually even matter that much. The most
Six,
obvious.
I think six did a good job at that. The mystery didn't quite matter as much as the characters.
I'll agree with that. Yeah, I think 6. You watched it. The mystery was a highlight for the sequels. It wasn't like the highlight for the first one or the sixth one, but I think the two most obvious characters ended up being the killers. But it was still great because it was carried just on the strength of their charisma and the writing and the escalation of the story. It's just everything about Scream, from the cast to the Ghostface design to the music, is just iconic. And it's my number one pick. Spoiler alert.
It's my number one pick too. So yeah,
we're finishing out our list by talking about it.
That's so funny.
It's also, I think, just the best horror franchise. In our last recording, we were talking about Chucky, and like the reason I love that franchise is because most horror franchises are not a continuous story. Like, it's reboots. You have 3 timelines of Halloween, or Freddy reboot, or Friday reboots, or whatever. But Scream, 6 movies in, is the same story following the same characters, at least the surviving characters, for the most part.
And I think what's interesting is, like, I kind of agree that every movie somewhat gives you something different. I know you have such a bad taste in your mouth for 3, and I don't love 3 as a movie, but I think it does have I
think there's no bad Scream movie. I think 3 is.
I think the only bad Scream movie is 5. I hate 5.
I maintain it's not a awful movie, but I think it's probably the worst Scream movie.
But when you get to
things about it.
Go on.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, but then when you get to something like Scream 4, when you get to something like Scream 4, where you're like, well, where can this freaking movie go at this point? And as you know, I love Scream 4 to death, and I think Scream 6 is a better movie, but Scream 4 will always stay with me. And obviously, when one spoiler happens with Scream 6, the reason I think Scream 4 always stays with me is because of the killer. Like, I think that I just think it's such a good reveal. I love the last scene, but I think Scream 6 is overall a better movie. Like, I think it moves better. It is so similar to Scream 1 in the way that Scream 1, like you said, like, the killers are great and adds to everything, but it's really about Sydney and the journey you kind of go there for. And then Scream 6 is really similar, where it's about the journey and it's about these characters kind of developing, and it's about the chemistry. And also about doing something different. It really is about doing something different. I don't want to spoil what happens in Scream 6, but I'm
so excited now.
It's very much about its ensemble, where it wasn't about that in the previous movies.
What's funny is that when we watched Scream 5, we talked about how we don't love it. Kat hates it. I'm not the biggest fan of it. And part of it was because we didn't really fall for the new characters. Like, it felt like it was just a rehash. And by design, it was the first Scream movie without Wes Craven. They had to kind of stick to the formula.
And we love Jenna Ortega. We want to love her.
Oh yeah.
Before they spread their wings, quote unquote, for Scream 6 and did their own take. And going into Scream 6, we talked about it before. I was like hyped for it. I think I just bought into the hype. I thought that the trailers looked really good, and I think they did exactly what they wanted. They took the characters they introduced in 5 and very organically passed the torch, where I want to see more of them now. Like, it's hard to do legacy characters without feeling like ingenuine, and I think they've done a great job of passing the torch. I like the core 4 or whatever they're called now, and I'm looking forward to
themselves the core 4. But also, I think Sam, who is the lead of the movie, again, will not spoil what happens, but what I love about the final girl trope is how they've evolved. Right, you go to Jamie Lee Curtis, Scream Queen, to your next survivor list, and whatever Sam is now, which I won't spoil, is really a next stepping stone to what I always wanted to crack in the final girl, which I've never made that story, because I was just like, oh man, I love this idea, and I don't know if anyone could crack it. And I think Halloween tried with Laurie, like the not remakes, but I don't know what you call it, the requels. Like, they tried with her, where it's like, what happens when you deal with all this trauma and you're holding that trauma, like, what do you become as a person? And no other movie has really done it besides Halloween. And I would say Scream does it in a really interesting way, where it's, what do you do with all that? And it does feel like a new chapter of where this genre can go.
Yeah.
Have you ever read the Final Girl Support Group? It's like a novel by Grady Hendrix.
I have not.
like kind of horror novels, but with a twist. I think you would really enjoy it. I read it like a couple years, like last year or the year before, and it's the concept is basically just like, so they have all the final girls from essentially all the big major
Mhm.
movies, but they obviously can't have them be like, it can't be like Sid from Scream, so it'll be like a different girl whose movie went on to become Stab or something like that, right?
Right.
Where like you can clearly be like, okay, this is Friday the 13th. This girl is obviously from Scream. This girl is obviously from, Nightmare on Elm Street. But it's
No
kind
one
of
has
the idea
mentioned
of,
on their list, which is very interesting.
I know. So it's the kind of idea of like what happens after they, go through this traumatic event, and like how do they deal with it as people, and like the main character is kind of like incredibly paranoid that it's going to happen again, and like kind of
Mhm.
lives in fear. So it's and then obviously it starts happening again.
Right.
But it was really interesting because you kind of, the end credits roll, and sometimes they'll be back for the sequel, but it seems like the Halloween movie did kind of start to deal with like how traumatized, how bad would that really mess up your life? But that novel was kind of a lot about that. So I think you'd really enjoy
I
it.
Yeah, I'd love to read something like that. Because yeah, no, I do think that's the next step of these horror movies is like, okay, you went through that traumatic thing. You're really just gonna write a book about it and that's it?
Just
Like there's
move
probably
on.
other things you're gonna do. Because I think Sydney in particular, and it's cool that she's passing the torch. I mean, not purposely because she didn't get paid enough, but like it's interesting that that's kind of was like her thing, where it's like, yeah, I was traumatized, but I kind of got over it, and it's like, oh, this is happening again, type situation. Like she never really she kind of sits with her emotions, but not really. And I think these movies are doing a better job of like, you dealt with that, and maybe you should talk about it.
I think Scream 6 does it in a more real time way, which is
Mm.
obviously the better way for storytelling with Sam. I think you really get, and honestly, all of them, but like especially Sam and Tara and her sister, you really get to sit with them as they process this fresh trauma. I think the original Scream trilogy does a good job with Sydney. I think she has a character arc. I think you kind of see her go through the the defeated feelings of like this is her life and this is gonna take over her life, and then come out the other end. And like, at the end of Scream 3, I think I may not love Scream 3, but I do like where it leaves off with Sydney. But I think it's a victim of time skipping, and I think that 6 is a more compelling story of processing of quote unquote
It's right
final
back
girl
to back
trauma. Sorry?
because it's back
Because
to
it's back to
back.
back,
Yeah.
exactly. Because it feels fresh, even though in universe it's like a year between, which I think is probably the same for Scream 1 and Scream 2. It's just the writing makes it feel more fresh, and I
But
think that's
also
why.
like one, well, actually, you're right because they were in high school and then they
And
went to
then
Yeah,
college.
college in
and then they were
this.
in college.
They
Yeah.
still did the same thing, but for some reason, this felt closer together. And maybe
Yeah,
because it's just how media back in the day, like college, you're like 50 years old, and in high school, you're 10. Like now, people make it a little bit more realistic of like, yeah, you're still a kid. You just so happen to be in a different setting.
yeah, I agree. I definitely can gush about Scream all day. Love it. Think every movie is a good movie, even if some of them aren't great movies. And I am very excited for where the franchise goes from here. I watched the TV show, which I didn't think was
Not
great.
great.
I watched the first season of the TV show and I was like, okay.
Yeah,
I
it
watched
was,
the first episode and I
it
was
was an
not.
interesting show.
It was something for sure. I kept tuning in every week. Like I was like watching it weekly back when the show was coming out and going, why am I watching this? But I would
Completionist Phil
always,
watched all 3
Oh
seasons,
wow.
and
oh, there was two more seasons.
they actually, the third season's a hard reboot. It doesn't have any of the returning cast. Like it has I think Kiki Palmer was in it.
Well, okay.
Wow, Keke Palmer is like in all those slasher
Yeah.
parody things.
She's
I
She
think
was in
season
Scream Queens.
I think it was
what?
a
Oh,
little
that's
better
right.
than the first 2 seasons, and they actually had Ghostface in it instead of just calling it Scream and not having Ghostface.
Yeah, that was stupid.
That was
I
a weird
remember.
choice.
Only thing I remember is like someone's mother went through something, and then they that was like their arc.
Yeah, not the best show, but also not related to the movies, but love Scream.
Well, I guess the mother
Good
thing
movie.
is the only thing that was related, and that's not
I
really.
guess spiritually related. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think it was a weird time. It was an MTV show, right?
it
It was
was
an
an
MTV
MTV show.
show.
Yeah,
Yes.
I remember that. I was like,
It's
oh
crazy.
boy. MTV's trying. Okay, so
Your
mine
number one.
too was Scream. Your number one was Scream. My number one is The Ring.
That's so
Oh,
interesting.
That's surprising.
Because I just think it traumatized me so much when I saw it originally that it just
You
kind
like
of like
paranormal movies, it seems
imprint.
like.
I do. I think I prefer. I like the slashers, but I think in terms of what scares me, it tends to be like the more supernatural,
Oh, yeah.
paranormal stuff, which is weird because the slasher stuff is probably more likely to happen. You're definitely more likely to be killed by an actual person than a ghost. But yeah, I thought that The Ring was so creepy. It was really well done. Like the tone of the movie was really off-putting. I can't remember what her American name was, like Samara or something. It's
Tomorrow.
such a yeah, it's such a creepy. The concept is like it's very. I just realized I have like two like curses that you have to pass on my top 5 list because it's it kind of is like a very it follows type of story where you watch this cursed videotape, which oh my god, the fact that it's a videotape makes me feel like a million
Retro.
years old. Very funny. But then you have to like get somebody else to watch it or you'll die in 7 days. So it's like like a chain letter
I
that
was
you
gonna
would
say
get.
it's very. When I looked up the data, I was like, I know I was alive for this, and I remember it. It's
It was like
2002.
2002, I think.
So I'm like, yeah, that
Yeah.
makes sense for the chainmail situation.
Yeah, like first off, it's VHS tape. It's the chainmail aspect of it. I feel like I definitely saw it in theaters, so this must have been like early high school for
I
me.
remember seeing trailers of it because I was just like looking at The Grudge too. I was like, I saw trailers of that too, and that was 2004. I was seeing
Yeah,
some nasty trailers when I was a kid.
you were. Well,
You
the
were like
funny
8
thing,
years old.
Yeah, I was watching like Lizzie McGuire movie, and I guess The Ring showed up.
oh my god, the funny thing is, I remember my movie going experience for this one because me and my friends went to go see it, and this was like before you would like reserve a seat in a theater, right?
Yeah,
So you
no,
just
this is way
show
before that.
way before that, before theaters were nice and like you could recline and
I
stuff.
remember I was in a theater seeing the Friday the 13th remake, and I sat on a stair because they ran out of seats to
Oh
sit
my
on,
god.
and then we
That's
left because we didn't have a seat for half the movie.
no,
But
that's
we
terrible.
left actually an hour and a half in. We stayed there for a while.
So we walked in and the whole theater was packed and the only seats were in like the first row.
Wow.
And I would not ever recommend seeing any movie in the first row, but especially not a horror movie. So when that little girl crawled out of the TV, it was like she was crawling right into my
Oh,
seat. It was terrifying. We were so close to the screen that when they like showed up put up old newspaper clippings, I had to do this with my head where I had to like move my head from like left to right to read it because we were just like right there. So the experience of seeing it was also a little bit traumatizing, but I just think that there's something so creepy, and I know this was like the beginning of like Hollywood starting to adapt Japanese horror
The
movies and being
Grudge.
like, yeah, then The Grudge came after that, and a couple other horror movies that they adapted from Japanese horror movies. But I don't think that any of those ever really did as good of a job as like The Ring. I feel like The Ring, like the creative team behind The Ring, we had Naomi Watts, who was really great. I feel like they actually wanted to do their own take on it versus just being like, hey, this is creepy in the Japanese version. Like, let's just do it. Whereas The Ring, had a little bit of its own feel to it.
I've never seen The Ring actually. I've
really?
seen The
Really?
Grudge. Because Jason Beer from again that
Yeah,
Roswell is
Roswell
incredible.
and Sarah
And
Michelle
Sarah Michelle
Gellar.
Gellar. So I remember watching it on TV and being like, oh, I guess I'll watch it and not being very impressed.
Fine. It's
I've never
fine.
seen The Ring.
Yeah, The Ring is scary.
I like The Ring. It's not one of my favorites. Something that always bothered me about The Ring, and this might not be something anyone remembers about it, but I really hate the color palette of the movie. It's
Yeah,
it's
it's
like
very
got this like blue film
blue.
over it the
You
whole
really
Yeah,
time.
don't like the blue.
it's very blue.
Um,
That was my memory of it too. It's like, and I feel like my memories of it is like the blueness was like really like kind of like I don't know. It just like brought the feeling of the movie as kind of
I could
claustrophobic because it's also one colored.
I could definitely see that. It frustrated me a little bit.
No, I think it's good. It's a good critique because when you said it's one color, I immediately was like blue.
Yeah. I think Samara is a fantastic movie villain. I think this when she crawls out of TV, it's like one of the most iconic shots in film. It's definitely in your like top 50. I don't know, maybe 50 is too much. There's a lot of really iconic film
There's
stuff, but it's
so
iconic.
many, but yeah, it's
It's
up
iconic.
there.
She's a great villain. I think Naomi Watts does really great. I think she really elevates like the mother character, and I think that from what I remember, I think that the child actor was pretty solid for her son. I remember Samara's backstory was a little convoluted for my taste.
It absolutely was for sure.
They went to like an island. And
They go to an island.
That's not up my alley,
There are
though.
horses somewhere that like run into the sea or something.
Yeah, the horses would run into the sea. I remember.
I don't know.
Which was a cool visual. I think my memory, and I like this movie. I think my memory is that feeling it was a little too convoluted and took a little too much time to get to certain things, but there were a lot of really strong horror elements. The tape was creepy. I remember scenes of them like extending the tape, trying to like piece together her history because of it. I thought that was interesting.
You know, she's the voice of Lilo.
I was actually going to be my fun fact is that Samara is the voice of Lilo from Lilo.
I was looking that up. I was like,
no
way.
way.
She does anything now, and it was like someone that she's the voice of Lilo. I'm like, that's so random.
That is hilarious.
That's her two roles. Her two claims to fame are
claims
Lilo
to fame. Very very opposite claims to fame.
Yeah. But it's a good movie. I love the TV scene. I love the well scene. I think it's
the well scene's
scary.
really
And
creepy.
I think it's a good example of like a meshing. Like I don't know where to fit it exactly. It's definitely like a paranormal movie, but it's also kind of a monster movie. And I like sitting right in the in between of that, and I like the way it plays with technology of the time a little bit. So
it sounds like the perfect paranormal movie I actually might enjoy, because I do like good commentary about like honestly like that the only thing you could live in 2002, which is like that chainmail aspect where you don't really see that very often. I think me and Phil were once like trying to figure out a story of something. We're trying to figure out like what scares you the most from this time period. And I think we did talk about chainmail.
The chain, because you really would get these like weird emails that are like, if you don't pass it on, like
I literally cried at one point because I ran out of like texts for the month and I couldn't send a chainmail. I thought I was gonna die. Like, I was stupid in like 6th grade.
Didn't Rocco send that to you?
Probably. I remember I was mad at him. My friend, he sent it to me. I was like, he's killing me.
He's literally killing me.
This is when I was still traumatized from watching Spider-Man 2000.
You were like, everything is terrible.
Yeah.
Green Goblin.
He's going to come in and make me a skeleton.
Amazing. So obviously we should wrap up. We've gone a little long, but I would love to see what was on some of your honorable mention lists.
Yeah, I mean, I think the surprising ones that didn't make it was Halloween. As you guys know, I love that movie, but did not make it. It was close though. The Menu, I really, really like.
Do you think that The Menu is a horror movie? Because I was actually just thinking about The Menu the other day.
Yeah, I think
how it was one of my favorite things I saw recently. Yeah, okay. Yeah, you're right. No, The Chef is a slasher.
I think it's the least horror movie that least of a horror movie that we've talked today, but I think it still qualifies.
Which is probably why it's not my top 5, but it's in my top 10. And the other one's Get Out. I really thought that was going to make my top 5, and it's actually pretty low on my top 10, but it's such a good movie.
Get Out was actually the one that was fighting Barbarian for slot 5 for me. I ended up edging Barbarian edged its way in, but Get Out is just fantastic.
Yeah. Definitely. Get Out was on my honorable mentions. So was Halloween. Halloween and It Follows went back and forth until I finally like was like, I have to just make a decision. Barbarian was on mine. The Conjuring movie was on mine, and Us actually, which I think is like Get Out is a great social commentary, but Us I think is scarier.
See, I remember being so hyped for Us and hating the movie when I saw it. I did not like it because I was so hyped for it. And Nope, I think, is in the middle for me. Like I enjoy it enough, and as a filmmaker, as a fan of filmmaking, I enjoy like the commentary of that. But Yeah, I didn't love Us. I'm also really shocked there's no Nightmare on Elm Street. None
Well,
of us were.
you know what? I've actually never seen it.
Oh wow, recommend. I think it's also like a very like Final Girl. It's the start of that, and there's a good commentary with Nancy. Nancy's actually one of my favorite Final Girls. I think she's just stuck in a kind of bad movie franchise, but I think Nancy's a really good character.
I think Nightmare is a really interesting franchise because it like is just like below the precipice of having like a great movie.
Yeah,
Like,
the movies are not good, but Nancy is really
the
good.
first one is like a solid enough movie, but it's not near the caliber of anything else we've talked about today. I think Freddy is a fantastic horror character. I think, and I said this about Chucky last recording, but I think I love the Chucky franchise. I love the characters. There's not one movie that's like that I would say is like this is the great movie. Like this belongs in like my top 5. And I think Nightmare is like that, but a little worse because Freddy. I think Nancy's a good final girl. And I think Freddy is a good killer.
She's not in all the movies. She's in like 2.
Yeah, she's in 1 and 3, I think.
Yeah.
But I think Friday. I think. Excuse me. I think Nightmare on Elm Street doesn't even reach the caliber of like the worst Chucky movie. I'll say.
I haven't seen it since high school either, which I think might be the reason why it's not. I feel like I loved it in high school, so I'm curious if I rewatched it now, if I'd have fonder or worse memories of it.
I watched it maybe 2 or 3 years ago. I watched the first and the second one, and the second one I think is very interesting now in retrospect because it has a very like gay undertone to it. And it's really like a final boy, which I think is fascinating, but it's still not a great movie. I think I don't even know if
the
Friday
movie is the most memorable to me. The
What was
Warrior Dreams,
the
the
Dream
Asylum one.
Warrior.
Yeah, Dream Warrior.
That one's definitely goofy. I don't even think a Friday. I keep saying Friday. I don't know why.
I think Friday 13th actually is the worst of them all. But
Friday.
What's
Yeah.
funny is I also haven't seen. So I've never seen Nightmare on Elm Street, and I haven't seen Friday the 13th.
I don't think you need to. Friday the 13th it's not a good movie in my opinion. I don't think it's good.
I want to see the first. I want to see the first of both of those film franchises, and then probably not go any further than that.
No, I think Nightmare on Elm Street you should go further, but Friday the 13th you should not.
Well, it depends on what you're looking for, because Friday the 13th is
gets
you got Jason going to space. Jason
that's true.
You know, there's some. I don't think either has a great movie, but Friday has some spectacularly bad movies. The fourth one, A New Beginning, literally the director was high, like tripping balls the entire movie, and he just hired a bunch of character actors who improvised all their lines. So you have all these like bombastic characters just walking onto the set and getting killed. It's so funny.
Oh
like,
my god, that's amazing.
None of them are good, but if you want to have a good time, watch Friday 4, Jason Takes Manhattan, and Jason X.
Jason X I've seen scenes of, I think because of film, they look ridiculous. I've only seen the first Friday the 13th, and I've seen the remake. I've seen a good chunk of Nightmare on Elm Street. Again, I've seen the first.
Did you see Freddy vs. Jason?
No. Because I didn't really like Jason, so I was like, I don't want to.
I think I said this earlier, but if you watch Freddy vs. Jason, just skip all the parts that they're not in because it's unbearable and it's more than half of the movie.
No. I mean, I feel like if you promise Freddy and Jason, that's what you should be giving us.
And we get it. It's literally like really good fight scenes, like better than the movie deserves, and like multiple locations. Like they know what people came for, but for some reason they pad out the movie. It's over 2 hours with like this like some of the most boring human civvy characters ever, and they suck.
No.
That sucks. But I think Morgan, you should definitely catch up on those. I maybe we'll do one of these days. We have a lot of spooky seasons ahead, but
we do.
They are classics, and Friday the 13th. I think the thing that sucks, at least from the first one, again, the other ones sound very bombastic, but the first one is unlike The Shining. If you know the twist, there is nothing to see about that.
There's no reason to watch it if you know the twist, and it's not even funny. A twist. Like
no, that's true.
I'm trying to.
I do actually know the twist, so I do feel like it will be
Friday
a little bit
spoilers if you don't mind. Then, but like the twist is that the killer is Pamela Voorhees, the mom of Jason. But literally, there's no mention of Jason before she's introduced, so it's not even a twist. the twist is that the killer is this old lady who has a son who died, who you just found out about before you met her.
And you see this really bad scene of the son drowning for a good chunk of, and the exposition is like at least 10 minutes of her explaining.
Oh
So
no.
that's my son Jason. He also went to Campion, and I, blah, 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 and that's why I killed everybody. And I think
And then-
she's the lunch lady or something in the movie.
That's
I
so
don't
funny.
even remember, but I remember that it doesn't even make sense, like, because she's upset that her son's dead, but then he's not dead. Like,
Yeah, I was
it's
about to say, well,
okay.
then he pops up for all those sequels, though.
There's like zero continuity between the movies. He's known for this hockey mask that he doesn't even get till the third movie, which is very interesting. So, like,
Really?
it just shows that like there isn't really a great Friday movie because like it takes 3 movies to get to the iconic look. He doesn't become Zombie Jason until like the 5th movie. I think Zombie Jason's probably what he's most known for being, like all like blue
Yeah.
and unkillable. So it's interesting.
That's hilarious. When you look at the, I looked up the Friday the 13th movies in order, and the covers of the movies, you're right about the hockey mask. It doesn't show up until the cover of the 4th movie.
Yeah, it took a while. He has a bag on his head in the 2nd movie, which is hysterical.
What?
I'll throw my honorable mentions in. I also had Get Out, The Shining, Bride of Chucky,
Nice.
Train to Busan. It's
I hear that one's really good.
It's a Korean zombie movie. I think it's definitely my favorite zombie movie.
You know what I just thought of? You've never seen Battle Royale. Does that count as a horror movie?
I don't know if it counts. I haven't
I
seen
don't
it. though.
know.
I definitely think you should. I actually think you'd be obsessed with it. I think
It's
a
on my watch
really
list.
good movie.
Yeah, it's definitely something I want to watch. We also have Scream 6, which we've talked about a lot already. Halloween 2018, which I think is
Ooh, that one was really
Maybe-
good.
maybe one of the best like requels, like legacy sequels in
Good movie.
horror, and it just sucks that they dropped the ball on the 2 that followed it.
I think the only reason I picked Halloween, the original, is just because there's more humor. So it's just like, if you're talking about what's the better movie, yeah, it's the 2018.
The
If
2018.
you're
for
talking
sure.
about like what's like more fun to watch, it's the original, because there's a lot of like, again, I'll always talk about the totally scene where they're walking out of the school.
Totally.
And she's like,
Totally.
totally,
Love
and
that.
she says about 10 times.
Yeah. And I think that's the end of my honorable mentions. I'm sure if we go through my letterbox, you can find 100 more movies. That gotta narrow it down.
Yeah, this one was a tough one to figure out what was going to be on my list. I was like, oh my God. And then as I would be thinking about the list, I would be like, wait, what about that one? What about that one? So a lot of good horror movies out there.
The
There are.
Exorcist is somewhere in my top 20. So
The Exorcist, I thought about putting on my list, but I was like, man, like 13-year-old Morgan is still too traumatized by watching it as sleepover to to unpack all that.
someday, maybe 50-year-old Morgan won't be ready. To
I was about to say you at least Kat knows because she went to Catholic school, so
Oh, yeah.
there's nothing more terrifying than being at Catholic school and being 12 and watching The Exorcist. You're just like, could it happen to me? Like, no, but
I don't have that trauma thing.
no,
No, I have a lot of Catholic trauma, and so does Morgan.
we do. I think that's gonna wrap us up for this episode. So Phil, thank you for joining us.
Yes.
Where
Staying up
can
late.
and staying up really late.
Was worth it.
Let the people know where they can find you and what you're working on, so we can let you go.
Yeah, you guys can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Phil Falco Writes. You could find me and all the comics that Kat and I write, including some horror comics. I don't know when this is being posted, but I might still have my supernatural horror book Haunting live on
I think I'm going
Kickstarter.
to try posting this tomorrow as we record this, because I want to start with the top 5. So I think you're safe. I think Haunting
And
will still be
you
live.
can check out Haunting. It's our supernatural horror series. Teenage boy, wherever he goes, the dead rise. He doesn't want to deal with it, so he doesn't. It's great if you like character-driven horror, which, if I haven't nailed it home enough today, is my favorite kind of horror. It's got comedy, action, drama, the creeping feeling of existential dread. You know, all the goodies that you
And
like.
a bratty teen.
And a bratty teen. So you can find that on my Twitter. And thank you guys for having me. I always enjoy talking to you guys about horror.
Oh, this
Thank
is
you.
great.
Thank you. We appreciate you being here.
Kat, what about you? Anything to plug?
Yeah, at Comic Uno, I have a Dancer Assassin book out right now, so go check it out. It's not much horror, but it's the horror of childhood trauma. So if you enjoyed that, go check it out. And that's it. That's it pretty much for me.
Nice. And you can find me as a co-host on Supergirl Radio, where we've been talking about the superpowered documentary, and we're I think gonna get into some Supergirl comics pretty soon. So that'll be exciting. And you can find us on Twitter at Legends_podcast. If you were following us before, we have migrated Twitter, so just go find at Legends_podcast and refollow. You can find us on Instagram at The Legendary Ladies. You can find us, you can listen to these podcast recordings as we do them, like Abby and Fiona did tonight, and weigh in by becoming a supporter on Patreon. That's patreon.com/The Legendary Ladies. And you can, watch us and get some episodes early, like our Bride of Chucky episode that we referenced in this one because we recorded them backwards.
Find out why Kat hates Matilda.
That is the
We wanna
origin
know.
story of why Kat hates Matilda. Our Patreon supporters are going to know weeks early. So you can go support us on Patreon. And then you can always send us an email about things that you would love us to talk about or feedback from episodes.
We are going to do that ER episode that Fiona mentioned. It's just been
Oh,
spooky
yeah.
season. So, but in November, hopefully we'll get that going.
Yeah. You can email us, thelegendaryladies@gmail.com. And I think that's going to do it for our episode. Thanks again, Phil, for doing this double recording and staying up so late. And we always love having you on the podcast. And until next time, stay legendary.